On October 27, 2006, I was on the night shift when I saw something that made me rethink everything I had believed in during my 13 years of service in the police force. My name is David Collins, and I worked as a police officer for the Marquette, Michigan Police Department. Our precinct covered the northern part of the city and the surrounding areas along Lake Superior. Over the years, I've seen a lot, from cases of domestic violence to drug dealers, but nothing prepared me for what happened that October night. Marquette is a small city with a population of about 21,000 located on the southern shore of Lake Superior. It's a picturesque place, but with one peculiarity: people regularly go missing there. In the 5 years leading up to that October, we recorded 17 cases of people going missing. Tourists, fishermen, students from the local college, they simply vanished into thin air. Most of the cases were attributed to accidents on the lake or in the woods, but there were always oddities in the reports that bothered me. I remember the case of Michael Johnson, a sophomore who disappeared in August 2005. His car was found on an old forest road, the keys were in the ignition, and the driver's door was open. Barefoot prints were found near the car, human, but much too large. They were a size 14, while Michael wore a size 9. The search party worked for 4 days, combing through the entire forest within a 5-mile radius, but found neither a body nor any clothing nor any signs of a struggle. There was also the case of the Harrisons, a husband, wife, and their 2 children from Detroit who came on a camping trip in September 2004. Their camp was found untouched, the tent was intact, the food hadn't gone bad, and their belongings were still in their places, but the family itself had disappeared. The only thing that caught my eye were the huge scratches on the nearby trees, too deep to have been made by a bear's claws and located too high up. Some of the scratches were found 10 feet above the ground. The authorities always came up with explanations. They drowned in the lake, got lost in the woods, were attacked by bears, or it was an accident. But I'd seen the crime scenes, examined the evidence, and something didn't add up. Bears in our area aren't aggressive toward people, especially if people don't threaten their cubs. And Lake Upper, despite its size, has fairly predictable currents. Sooner or later, the current carries you ashore. On that October evening, I was patrolling Highway 41, which runs along the northern outskirts of Marquette. It is an 18-mile stretch of road, with Lake Verkney on one side and a dense forest of maple, oak, and pine trees on the other. During the day, it's a beautiful place, but at night it becomes almost eerie. The trees come right up to the road, and the headlights illuminate only a narrow strip of asphalt and a few feet of the shoulder. The weather was typical for late October in Michigan: cold, damp, with occasional drizzle. The temperature hovered around 38 degrees Fahrenheit, and the breeze coming off the lake made it feel even more damp. I was wearing my standard uniform, a dark blue shirt, pants, and a bulletproof vest under my service jacket. The heater was running in the car, and from time to time reports from other sections could be heard on the radio. Around midnight, I received a radio call about a minor traffic accident in the city center. 2 students in a pickup truck had crashed into a road sign. Nothing serious, but I had to file a report. I turned around and drove into town, spending about 45 minutes filling out paperwork and interviewing witnesses. The guys were sober. They'd just lost their focus because they were tired. A typical situation for students during exam season. After returning to my post around 2 a.m., I continued my patrol. At that time, there was practically no traffic. Occasionally a truck driver heading toward the Canadian border would pass by, or local residents returning from the night shift. I was driving slowly, at about 40 miles per hour, keeping a close eye on the roadside. At this time of year, deer often run out onto the road, especially in the early morning hours. About 2 miles from the turnoff to the old sawmill, which closed in 1998, I noticed something on the right shoulder in the headlights. At first, I thought it was a moose or a large deer. The silhouette was too tall to be a person, but too upright to be a typical 4-legged animal. The creature was standing among the roadside bushes, about 20 feet from the edge of the road. I slowed down and turned on my high beams. What I saw made me slam on the brakes and come to a stop in the middle of the road. It was definitely not an animal in the usual sense. The figure had roughly human proportions, but was significantly taller and thinner than an ordinary person. I estimated his height to be 7.5 to 8 feet, and his build was extremely thin, almost skeletal. His skin, or whatever was in its place, was grayish-brown and glistened in the headlights as if it were wet. But what struck me most were his eyes. They reflected the headlights like an animal's eyes in a dark forest, but they were too large and set too far apart. A bright yellow glow, each eye about the size of an adult's fist. The creature stared straight at me without blinking, and there was neither fear nor curiosity in its gaze, only a cold, calculating assessment. I sat in the car for a few seconds, unable to move. 13 years on the police force had taught me to assess situations quickly and make decisions, but right now my brain seemed to have shut down. I had never encountered anything like it before. It was neither a human, nor an animal, nor anything else that could be explained or classified. The creature stood motionless for a few more seconds, then took a step toward the road. Its movements were fluid but unnatural. It didn't walk like a human or an animal, but rather glided along, barely bending its limbs. With every step, it drew closer to my car, and I noticed that its arms, if you could call them that, were disproportionately long and reached almost to its knees. My hand reached for the holster holding my service weapon, a standard Glock 17 that I'd been carrying for 8 years. But even after taking the safety off the gun, I realized I had no idea what I was dealing with or whether the gun would help in this situation. The department's protocols did not anticipate encounters with unidentified creatures on forest roads. The creature continued to approach, and when it was down to 10 feet away, I could clearly hear the sound of its breathing. His breathing was labored and raspy, with wet wheezes, as if his lungs were filled with fluid. The smell wafting in through the car's open window was revolting. A mixture of rotting meat, swamp mud, and something chemically acrid that made me cover my nose with my jacket sleeve. As the creature came even closer, I could make out details that still haunt me in my nightmares. His face, if it could even be called that, was an elongated, almost triangular shape with prominent cheekbones and sunken cheeks. Its skin was covered with something like scales or rough growths that glistened in the headlights. There was no mouth or speech, only a dark slit in its place. A chill ran down my spine, one that had nothing to do with the October weather. I gripped the gun tighter in my hand, but I still couldn't bring myself to aim it at that creature. Part of my mind refused to accept what was happening as reality. Maybe it was just someone in a costume, a college prank, or something else with a logical explanation. But when the creature leaned over and touched the hood of my patrol car with something that looked like a hand, all my doubts vanished. The sound was like a heavy metal object striking metal, a loud clang that made the entire car shake. The metal was left with dents nearly an inch deep, arranged in a pattern resembling a palm print, but with 5 long scratches that appeared to have been made by claws. The car's engine was still running, the headlights were shining on the creature, and I could see it slowly circling the car, its yellow, glowing eyes fixed on me. As it moved along, I could hear sounds. Not footsteps, but more like a scraping noise, as if its claws were scratching the asphalt. Occasionally there was a wet slapping sound, the origin of which I preferred not to analyze. I took out my walkie-talkie and tried to contact the dispatcher, but all I could hear on the air was static, hissing and crackling, which I had never heard before on this stretch of road. My cell phone had absolutely no signal, even though the cell tower was only 3 miles away. I found myself cut off from the outside world, and this creature was just a few feet away from the car. The creature completed its circle and was back in front of the hood. This time it came even closer, almost touching the windshield. I could make out every detail of its repulsive face, every scratch on its gray skin, every twitch of the muscles beneath the skin. His breath left wet spots on the glass, which slowly trickled down in thick droplets. Then I noticed something that sent an even stronger chill down my spine. Flaps of fabric hung down from the lower part of the creature's face, near its jaw. Looking more closely, I realized it was part of a shirt. Blue plaid fabric, the kind worn by hunters or fishermen. The fabric was soaked with something dark and sticky that looked almost black in the headlights. The memory came flooding back to me instantly. 2 weeks ago, Thomas Erickson, a 44-year-old fisherman from a neighboring town, had gone missing. His empty boat was found drifting near the northern shore of the lake, and only fishing rods and a box of bait were found on the shore. Thomas was wearing a blue plaid shirt, exactly the same as the one whose scrap was now hanging from the creature's face. The creature suddenly backed away a few steps from the car and made a sound that I cannot describe in human words. It was something between the howl of a wounded animal and the screech of metal against metal, a piercing, ear-splitting sound that made me cover my ears with my hands. The sound lasted about 10 seconds, echoing through the forest, and somewhere deep in the thicket, a similar howl answered it. The response came not just once, but several times, first from the left side of the road, then from the right, and then another one, somewhere behind me. I realized that there was more than one creature in front of me. There were others somewhere in the woods, and now they knew where I was. The thought that I was surrounded by unknown predators in the middle of a deserted road finally spurred me into action. I pressed hard on the gas pedal, intending to get out of there as quickly as possible. but the car jerked and stalled. My attempt to start the engine was unsuccessful. The starter turned over, but the engine wouldn't start. Red warning lights came on the dashboard, indicating electrical problems. The creature apparently realized that I was trying to drive away and approached the car again. This time, it went to the driver's side door and began scratching the window with the same claws that had slashed the hood. The sound was terrifying. A piercing screech that made you want to cover your ears and scream. The glass held, but white scratches appeared on it, growing deeper with every passing second. In desperation, I grabbed my gun and aimed it at the creature through the glass. The creature froze for a moment as if assessing the threat, and then slowly backed away a couple of steps. I rolled down the window a few inches and fired a shot into the air. A loud bang echoed through the night forest, drowning out the distant cries of other creatures. The effect was immediate. The creature standing in front of my car let out the same piercing scream, but this time there were hints of pain or rage in its voice. It recoiled 20 feet, never taking its eerie yellow eyes off me. We stared at each other for a few seconds, then the creature turned and disappeared into the forest, moving more like a giant spider than a running animal or a human. The silence that followed his disappearance was almost as frightening as the creature itself. No sounds from the forest, no cries in response. Just the sound of my own breathing and the pounding of my heart, which seemed to echo throughout the entire area. I sat in the car for a few more minutes, clutching my rifle and peering into the darkness between the trees. This time, my attempt to start the car was successful. The engine started right up and the dashboard readings were normal. The radio came back on, and I heard the familiar voice of the night dispatcher discussing a minor offense in the city center with another patrol. My cell phone showed full signal strength. Everything went back to normal, as if nothing had happened. But the dents on the hood were real. So were the scratches on the driver's side window. And the piece of blue plaid fabric I noticed on that creature's face looked far too much like the shirt worn by the missing Thomas Erickson to be just a coincidence. I slowly turned around and drove back toward the city, checking the rearview mirror and the side mirrors every few seconds. The drive to the site took 20 minutes, the longest 20 minutes of my life. There could be another creature lurking in every shadow between the trees. Every rustle of leaves in the wind made me grip the steering wheel tighter. I was driving at nearly twice the speed limit, but that night, obeying traffic laws was the last thing on my mind. It was quiet at the station. Only Sergeant Carlson was sitting behind the counter, working on a crossword puzzle in the local newspaper. He looked up when I walked in, and immediately noticed the state I was in. I must have looked the part, pale, disheveled, with trembling hands. Carlson asked what had happened, but how could I explain something I barely understood myself? Should I say that on Highway 41 I ran into a 6-foot-tall creature with yellow eyes, that it wrecked my patrol car and was dressed in the rags of a missing fisherman? Carlson had been on the police force for 22 years, but even he would have thought I was crazy. I said that I had encountered an aggressive animal, possibly a sick bear or moose, that damaged my car and fled into the woods. It wasn't exactly a lie. What I saw was definitely an animal, just not the kind described in zoology textbooks. Carlson recorded my statement in the incident log and said he would send a request to the Wildlife Protection Agency in the morning regarding possible problems with wild animals in the area. I spent the rest of my shift at the station, doing paperwork and trying not to think about what had happened. But my thoughts kept returning to that piece of cloth, to those yellow eyes, to the sounds that creature made. And most importantly, the cries coming from the forest, which meant there were several of these creatures. By the end of the workday, I had made a decision that changed the rest of my life. I could no longer ignore what I had seen on Highway 41. There were too many coincidences, too many unexplained details. If those creatures were really preying on people in our neighborhood, someone had to stop them. That evening, I went home and told my wife the truth about what had happened on the road. Sue listened silently as I told my story, asking clarifying questions from time to time. She had known me for 12 years and understood that I wasn't one to fantasize or exaggerate. When I finished, she was silent for a long time, and then she asked what I was going to do. I explained that I had to get to the bottom of it. Perhaps these creatures' lair was somewhere in the forest around the lake, and if I had managed to find it, I would have had irrefutable proof of their existence. Then I would be able to convince my superiors to take serious measures to protect the public. The next day, I asked Captain Morgan to allow me to conduct a thorough investigation into the disappearances. I referred to the discovery of Erickson's remains and the unusual evidence found at the crime scene. Morgan, who had been in charge of the precinct for 8 years, knew firsthand about the problem of the disappearances and agreed to let me conduct further investigation. For the next 3 days, I studied maps of the area and old police reports. I marked all the locations of disappearances over the past 10 years on the map and tried to find a pattern. Most of the incidents occurred within a 25-mile radius of the city, in the wooded area between the lake and the highway. People went missing particularly often in the area of the old logging roads, which had not been used since the late 1990s. One place in particular caught my attention: an abandoned logging camp 17 miles northwest of Marquette. The camp was closed in 1997 when the company went bankrupt, but the buildings and equipment remained on site. Over the past 5 years, 6 people, tourists, hunters, and fishermen, have gone missing within a 3-mile radius of the camp. On October 31st, I drove to the abandoned camp. The road was in poor condition. The asphalt was cracked with grass growing through it in places, and the bridges over the streams looked rickety. We had to drive the last 5 miles on a dirt road, which, after the recent rains, had turned into a chaotic mix of mud and puddles. The camp was located in a small valley surrounded by hills covered with mixed forest. This place used to be bustling with activity. Dozens of people worked here. Trucks hauled logs day and night, and sawmills were in operation. Now, however, it was a gloomy, abandoned place where nature was gradually reclaiming its territory from humans. The main building, which served as an office and living quarters for the workers, was a 2-story barracks made of wood that had darkened with age. The roof had partially collapsed, the windows were broken, and the doors had been torn from their hinges. Nearby stood the skeletons of warehouse buildings, the rusty remains of machinery, and piles of sawdust and wood chips overgrown with brush. I left my car at the camp entrance and set out to explore the surroundings on foot. I was holding a powerful flashlight and a digital camera in my hands, and my service weapon was holstered at my waist. It was a cloudy day. Low clouds hung low over the tops of the pine trees, and a light rain fell from time to time. The atmosphere of this place lent itself to gloomy thoughts. The first thing that caught my attention was the footprints. There were many footprints of various sizes and shapes in the mud around the buildings. Most of them belonged to common forest animals: deer, raccoons, and possibly bears. But among them were those strange footprints I had already seen on the lakeshore, large, resembling human footprints, but with clear differences in the structure of the toes and claw marks. The tracks led to the main building and disappeared at the entrance. I walked up to the door, or rather, what was left of it, and peered inside. The first floor was littered with debris from collapsed partitions, trash, and leaves that had been blown in by the wind over the years of neglect. But amid this chaos lay objects that shouldn't have been there. In the corner of the room lay a pile of clothes: shirts, pants, jackets, and shoes. Everything was torn and mixed with dirt and leaves, but it clearly belonged to people. I took a picture of my find and began examining the items more closely. Some of the clothing looked familiar to me: a blue windbreaker with the University of Minnesota logo, which one of the missing geologists had been wearing. Under a pile of clothes in the far corner, I found a hiking backpack, a green one made by the North Face, with a metal frame. The backpack was torn in several places. The straps were torn off, but some of the contents were still intact. Inside, in a plastic bag, were some documents: a driver's license in the name of James Parker of Chicago, credit cards, and family photos. James Parker. I recognized that name from reports of missing persons. The 32-year-old programmer disappeared while on a solo hike in August 2005. His car was found in a parking lot near the trail leading to the waterfall, 12 miles from here. The search lasted 5 days, but no trace of Parker was found. I climbed the creaky staircase to the second floor, expecting the rotten planks to give way under my weight at any moment. The second floor was in even worse condition. The roof was leaking, the floors were rotten, and debris from the beams and roofing material was scattered everywhere. But in one of the rooms, I discovered something that sent a chill down my spine. On the floor, right in the center of the room, lay a pile of bones. Human bones, skulls, ribs, long bones from the arms and legs, and vertebrae. Judging by the number of skulls, I counted the remains of at least 4 people. The bones had been gnawed on, and many bore the same distinctive scratches and bite marks that I had seen on Erickson's remains. But the most terrifying thing wasn't the bones themselves, but the way they were arranged. It wasn't a chaotic pile. The bones were arranged in a specific order. The skulls were neatly laid out in a circle, and the long bones were stacked parallel to one another. Someone or something had gathered these remains and arranged them with clear intent. I took several photos, trying to capture the arrangement of the bones from different angles. My hands were shaking, partly from the cold, partly from the horror of realizing what I had discovered. This was no random collection of the remains of a predator's victims. It resembled an altar or a place where some kind of ritual was performed. When I took a closer look at the bones, I noticed that some of them had strange marks on them, not from teeth or claws, but as if they had been made by a sharp object. Several of the shells had neat, perfectly round holes, as if they had been drilled. The ribs had smooth cuts, too precise to have been made by an animal's claws. Suddenly I heard a sound behind me, a quiet creak of the floorboards. I spun around sharply, grabbing my gun, but the hallway outside the room was empty. Only the wind blew through the abandoned building, stirring up dust and making the old floorboards creak. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there. I decided not to stay in the building any longer than necessary. After taking photos of my finds and noting down the location's coordinates, I hurried back down to the first floor. But a surprise awaited me at the exit. New footprints had appeared on the dirty floor. Fresh footprints from the same strange paws I'd seen outside. Someone, or something, had gotten into the building while I was upstairs. The footprints were wet. The creature had passed through here no more than 10 minutes ago. They led from the entrance across the entire room to the staircase I had just come down, and then back to the exit. It turned out that while I was examining the remains upstairs, one of the creatures was downstairs watching me. The thought that this creature could have come upstairs at any moment while I was defenseless among the bones made my face go pale. I hurried out of the building and headed for my car, glancing back every now and then and listening for sounds around me. The forest seemed full of hidden dangers. Behind every rustle of leaves, a predator might be lurking. When I got to the car, I noticed some new dents on the hood, the same ones I'd seen after the encounter on the highway. The creature had been here while I was inspecting the camp and had left a message, or maybe a warning. Fortunately, the engine started right up, and I hurried to get out of that cursed place. On the way back to the city, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every few minutes I checked my rearview mirrors, but the road behind me was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed until I reached Marquette. It wasn't until I found myself within the city limits, among the streetlights and ordinary people, that I felt a sense of relief. At the police station, I went straight to Detective Harris and told him about my findings. I showed him photos of the bones, clothing, and documents found at the abandoned camp. Harris studied the photographs with a somber expression, shaking his head from time to time. When I finished my story, he was silent for a long time, mulling over what he had heard. Finally, Harris said that tomorrow we would head to the camp with a team of forensic experts and a medical examiner. The findings had to be officially documented, the remains had to be recovered for examination, and a thorough survey of the area had to be conducted. If that place really was the lair of unknown predators, strong evidence was needed to convince the authorities to take serious action. But when we arrived at the camp the next morning, we were in for a disappointment. The building was empty. No bones, no personal belongings, no footprints, just dust, debris, and leaves, as one would expect in an abandoned building. Even the footprints at the entrance had vanished, as if they'd been carefully swept away. Harris searched the building from top to bottom but found nothing to back up my story. Forensic experts collected dust and soil samples, but preliminary analysis did not reveal any traces of blood or human remains. The medical examiner just shrugged. Without physical evidence, there was nothing he could do. On the way back, Harris remained silent and lost in thought. I realized that he was beginning to doubt what I was saying, to think I was a victim of stress or hallucinations. But the photos on my camera were real. Skulls, bones, clothes, documents. Someone or something had removed all the evidence, knowing that I would bring people with me. A week after that incident, I submitted my resignation from the police force. Officially, the reason given was family circumstances. The truth is, I could no longer work within a system that refused to see the obvious. The photos are still on my camera, the only proof that I really did see those bones and remains. But who could I show them to? Who would believe a former police officer talking about monsters in the forests of Michigan? The disappearances continued even after I left. Every few months, local news reports would surface about missing tourists, fishermen, and hunters. The authorities continued to attribute everything to accidents and bears. Right now, I work as a security guard at a shopping center in Detroit. I moved here with my family right after I was laid off to get away from Lake Superior and those forests. Sometimes at night, when I can't fall asleep, I look at those photos on my camera. I know those creatures are still out there. They hunt, kill, and cover their tracks. And they're smart enough to be wary of people. Maybe that's exactly why they destroyed all the evidence after my visit. If you ever find yourself in the woods around Upper Lake at night and hear strange noises, don't go there to check it out. Turn around and get out of there as fast as you can. I've seen them. I know they exist, and I'm lucky to be alive.